And this is what people can call from their seams and their filtering, like you mentioned earlier, right? Like if you want to filter stuff out, this is some of the commands they would use to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So here's an example of a risk detection, and we have a lot more information here. So if we have the correlation ID and the request ID, these are the things that relate to the sign-in, right? That if you're going to want to go see, okay, well, oh my gosh, they found this thing, and like which sign-in was it related to, and what was the type? Okay, so by the way, all this is in our docs, the link that Mark shared, the AK link. But this means that we saw unfamiliar sign-in features. This shows that an admin dismissed the risk. The risk level was low. Here, actually, it's that the AI confirmed that the sign-in was.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the 425 Show. I will be your host today. I'm Mark Morzinski, and we have a special guest here. We have Eitan, and we are going to be talking about identity protection. But before we get into that, just a couple of quick reminders. We post all of our previous shows on our YouTube feed. So there's some past shows around like deep dives into Windows Hello for Business, a bunch of things around our new governance stuff, around like lifecycle workflows and things of that nature. And also you can follow us on our LinkedIn page. We try to post things there throughout the week. So like this week, we actually shared yesterday that the Azure AD Security Operations Guide has been updated to include some new PIM alerts. And then also on Monday, we shared around how there's some new logs around graph activities. You can see things like what's in the tokens and stuff like that. So we try to share kind of interesting things throughout the week on our LinkedIn page. So feel free to give this a follow. But okay, we are here today to talk about identity protection. So Eitan, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. My name is Eitan Basri. I'm a senior product manager on the identity security team at Microsoft, and I spend most of my time working on identity protection, which if you're not familiar with, will get you real ramped up on it today. So thanks for joining. And I'll also just mention that I have a couple monitors going. So if I'm not looking directly at you, it's not because I'm distracted. I'm just looking at a few different things.
Yeah, it's the behind the scenes magic that Jorge is. So Jorge is usually one in the front of the camera. He does the monthly things with Grace. So this time he's helpful. He's in the back of the house, going to do a good job for us. So where did you want to start? Did you want to start with a demo, or where did you want to
Let's do that. Yeah, let's get into it. I'll give a brief, just a brief walkthrough of the product, and then we'll get into everything that happens behind the scenes and what it can do for you. So
let me say one more thing too. Sorry. Sure thing. We also, if you have any questions, please put them in the chats. We're streaming this on YouTube, Twitch, and LinkedIn, and we have like Nick and Bailey and Jeff and Grace and stuff like that looking to answer questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But okay. Go for it.
Thanks. So what is identity protection? So Entra ID protection is a threat detection system that's actually built into Entra ID. So it's actually very unique in that sense. There's not a lot of products out there that can do identity threat protection native to the identity provider. And so one of the things that gives us is an advantage in terms of being able to make decisions about threats at runtime when sign-ins are actually happening, right? That's a huge advantage. So what I'm showing you here is our new preview page, our new landing page. And what you see here is some charts about how many attacks have been blocked, which is the ability of identity protection to actually interrupt an identity attack. We're going to get into how identity protection works with features like conditional access, and also showing you how many users have been automatically protected. So these policies that you can set up to not only detect the threats, but to be able to respond to them automatically and remediate those types of threats. We give you some statistics. This is all demo data, by the way. So if you see funny numbers, don't worry about it. This is our Woodgrove demo tenant. So those hours, that probably wouldn't be typical for a lot of customers to spend 7,000 hours, but you never know.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, that's one of my actually favorite metrics is the mean time to remediation, right? Because I think there's a lot of tooling and things of that nature where we're talking about threats and stuff, but like really at the bottom line, right, is like, are we remediating the threats that were coming in? So this is like my favorite of the four by far. And I suspect some people's actually might be longer because they haven't ever cleaned any of this up.
Yeah. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is if you enable automatic remediation with conditional access, you're going to drive that number way, way down. The reason that number balloons is because there is an automatic control set up in place, and the security team is tasked with going in, investigating, dismissing risk, and all that manual stuff. Really doesn't, at the end of the day, scale very well. If we detect a threat or an attack on a user, we're not going to be able, and you don't have conditional access set up. Again, you're going to stay in that at-risk state and you're going to end up with high risk users, medium risk users, low risk users. So that's where you can, this card is where you can click and drill down into who's high risk. High risk is the highest level of confidence that we have that an identity has been compromised. I'm going to get through all these details if this is all new information for you.
I was going to say,
Don't
you're going to kind of
worry.
talk about the different risk levels and what they mean.
We're going to talk about
and,
all of it. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I just wanted to show people like, what is it like, what is the product we're talking about before we get into the details, right?
No, that's great.
This is an interesting card here. This is sort of like our MITRE like attack vector card that's like, what are the different categories of attacks that we're seeing, right? For us, it's really important that we be aligned with industry and industry terminology. So you see down here, like you're gonna see like there's ones that, for example, like access using a valid account. Valid accounts is, you'll find it in the MITRE framework, right? Collection, similarly, gonna find that sort of stuff here. So again, this is a lot of test data here, so it's not as voluminous. But if you look here, like there are a lot of different kinds of attack types that we're monitoring for, and then they're sorted by whether or not they're remediated, blocked, or not remediated.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like a nice dashboard, right? Of this, like kind of showing you like what's kind of going in your environment of like the attacks, which ones are being remediated and which ones are not, to kind of give that quick view.
Yeah, and as we think about some of the emerging types of attacks like token theft, being able to see that specific type, we have a few different detections for it. Being able to like filter and say like, all right, just show me like all the token thefts that are happening, and are we remediating those, right? That allows you to just slice this in the way that you need to slice it when you want to understand what sort of threats are going on in your environment. We have a map here that shows you where the different attacks originating from. This might also give you a key into, hey, should I even be allowing sign-ins from this particular area? Because as a lot of you know, you can set up named locations. You can set up named locations to prevent. Let's say I just don't want people to sign in from Panama. Like, nothing against Panama, but like, if I don't want it, like we don't do business in Panama, that's not there, then you can straight up block it, right? And that might be an important posture decision for you.
Yeah, I think that works well for a lot of customers, because I do sometimes see when there's like active attacks and things of that nature, people kind of know like where are they coming from and why are they doing this, right? And I always tell customers, look, like with that information, like will that change how you're going to defend the attack if you know where they're coming from and like what their motivation is? You'll probably actually really never know. But this is a really good view for a lot of customers. They go, well, I only operate in North America, so I have sign-ins coming from these other countries. Like, why am I even letting these things through? Let's start blocking some of this type of stuff. So I think that's a real good view to see if there's like gaps that we want to close in our environment. So this is real. I like this a lot.
Yeah. And then finally, we give some recommendations and some activity call outs. So recommendations is like, basically acting off of the data that we showed above, which is saying, hey, you got all these risky users. You need to make sure that you've got a policy that's going to be able to disrupt that sort of thing. So we're immediately recommending conditional access. We've also got a case like with leaked credentials. So there are several, and I'm going to go into this in depth, but we've got several detections that are 100% precision, meaning they're not predictive. We know that the threat is there. So a leaked credential is an example of when we find a leaked credential, we validate it in Entra ID, and then notify you about it. And so that means that like you absolutely want to reset that password if it's been leaked. And so that's
I had a customer that had, in a remote region, they had 3 leaked credentials, and one of them was a service account. And this is the only tool that caught it. So they did their incident response and all this stuff. They found some stuff. They removed it. They rotated the passwords, all that kind of good stuff. And then 3 weeks later, the same 3 accounts showed up as another leaked credential. So whatever they thought they had removed from the environment, they didn't, right? So this was a really good signal for them to go investigate this stuff. So if you have this in your environment, you got to take action on it right away.
Right on. Good. So let's switch over to the deck. And what I'd like to do is take you through some of the taxonomy and the concepts and details behind like how this all comes to fruition. Basically, like, hey, okay, I've showed you the product, like I've showed you at the high level, and maybe that was a bit of a whirlwind. So sorry, right?
That's
but
good.
let me like walk you through like what is this product, like how does it work? How does if I take you under the hood, like how does it all function? And then what are some takeaways, some hopefully useful takeaways that you can have as next steps?
Yeah.
So number one, like what is identity protection, right? It is the system of detecting identity threats across 3 main categories. Ones that could be signals that can be auto-generated, meaning we use machine learning or rules-based detections to notify you of those risks. We have expert-generated alerts. This includes primarily things from our security researchers. So Microsoft is lucky enough to have thousands of security researchers who can identify when threats are coming either from nation-state actors, from cyber criminals, etc. We're able to now take that information and let you know when we see that type of activity happening in your environment. And finally, end-user generated signals. So this is where you, our customers, our partners, can actually notify us of certain things happening in your environment. We have a system called Confirm Compromised or Mark Compromised for sign-ins, and those sorts of things help you in your environment to keep track of identity compromise. But we also use that information internally to enrich our own signals. And then once we have those signals, we report them across three main taxonomies. So we have the concept of risky users, which means the user account itself, we're assigning risk to that. We have the idea of a risky sign-in. So risky sign-ins are inextricably tied to risky users, but they have occurred related to sign-in activity. You can imagine the lead credential example we talked about has nothing to do with the sign-in. It is firing as a detection because of something we discovered offline, and we are simply reporting it to you. The idea of a token theft, where we see a sign-in activity using a token that wasn't expected, would be a sign-in risk. And then the final one we have is this newer category, risky workload identities. This is actually for a different identity type. This is for a service principal or application, where nothing to do with users, but we see sign-in activity or offline activity off of the workload identity that is showing us that it's particularly risky. So go ahead, Mark. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, the risky workloads, we could probably do a whole other session on that, because those are like their own kind of animal, right? Because like some of the patterns that you follow with like your users is like you reset passwords or, that kind of investigation. Like those don't always work on the application that's running like mission critical stuff or 2 a.m. There's a problem with it, or the good example I always like to use is it does like some sort of like loss of life or limb, right? Because it's like a safety system. Like you can't just pull that stuff apart and kind of do that. But we actually had a really good question here on YouTube from Andrew, and he was asking, for identity protection, is there a way to kind of set this up, like to learn this, like a demo? Are we going to cover a little bit? I know there's some documentation around generating these alerts and stuff, but like, are we going to talk about that? You have that coming up in your slides a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the number one thing to know about identity protection is, and in terms of demo tenant for training and all that, I mean, I think we do have some test tenants out there that people can try out. I think if you create a new tenant, you get a free like 90-day trial of Entra ID P2. I think if you're completely starting out, so that's good. We have some guidance around simulating risk events. So there are ways to generate some risk signals. Usually we see there's two things that people want to do when they're starting to pilot identity protection. Number one, they want to make sure that if they set up a conditional access policy that uses this risk signal, that it's not going to break anybody.
Yep.
And that's what I've kind of highlighted here in this dotted line box.
Yeah.
Because that's the most critical thing to do. Number two, they want to make sure that their SOC team, the security team, can ingest this type of alert in their tooling. When that might be in a SIM tool, which I don't think I can do. I don't think I can use a laser pointer on this, but it's the on the far right. We talked about like seamless integration via Azure Monitor. So and we talked about SIEM tools below that. So if you want to do long-term storage or stream to be able to do like like a logic app and like route something and ServiceNow, like you can
right.
You
want to build your playbooks on the alert and stuff like that.
Yeah. We have a native integration with Sentinel. We have native integration with Defender. So not a lot of work needed there to consume those. But if you're using Splunk or CyberArk or QRadar or one of these tools, we have all the tooling set up for you to stream those events to there.
And we also have Sigma rules for these as well. We have that in the Sigma project as well. If you have another SIEM there.
Yeah, but really, if there's one thing you take away from this session, it's that you want to be using these signals for risk-based conditional access policies. The reason is threefold, really. Number one, it's going to speed up your response time to the incident, meaning your ability to use automated tooling to respond to a threat that is detected by the system means that your end user is going to, your legit end user is going to be able to remediate that risk a lot faster, and it's going to automatically disrupt the attacker. You're not going to have to, so you're going to save time. You're going to have faster time to response. You're going to save time and effort on the SOC team, who's not going to have to manually investigate that stuff. And I'll tell you right now, they don't get to everything. They're going to usually just do the high, maybe the medium risk stuff, and we'll get into what high, medium, and low mean. But they're going to investigate the most severe things and not investigate the less severe things. So there's that trade-off there. Right, and so there's all these benefits that you have. It's save time, save effort, faster response time, and you're going to have fewer. The number one thing is going to have fewer compromised users in your environment, right? Like, it's actually going to stop compromise. So so that's really the critical piece is to set that up. And really the number one way to set that up, and I'll show you. Actually, we can go over to the back over to the demo.
Sure.
I'll show real quick what that looks like in conditional access, because there's several ways that you can do it, but I'll show it really briefly here. I'm going to create a new policy. I'll say risk-based policy. What I would do is I would say, okay, I'm going to do all my users, and typically I would do some exclusions for a few like break glass accounts.
Yeah, we should make sure we're following good conditional access practices for that. But for this demo, we're okay.
Yeah, for all cloud apps, I would select that. And then the condition I would pick, let's say I want to do sign-in risk. So I'm going to explain to you what sign-in risk means. But sign-in risk means it's like, it's going to detect risk during sign-in. Like in milliseconds, we will make a risk assessment, and we will decide, the system will decide whether or not the sign-in attempt is risky. So let's say I just pick high, okay? That's the highest level of assurance. And then I go to the access controls. So remember, conditional access is a series of if-then statements. So my if statement is if it's high risk, if it's high sign-in risk, then I want to require MFA in my auth strength, select. And then I want to actually do this extra thing, which is called a session control. I want to require sign-in frequency for every time. The reason I'm doing this is because this is going to trigger reauthentication, and this is important to defend against token theft. So go ahead and select that, and then put it into report-only mode. So going back to the question on demoing and piloting from that we got online, you put this into report-only mode, and you hit create, and then you can observe over the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, what would happen. It puts it into like a silent or audit mode.
Right.
So you'll be able to go back and you'll be able to see, if I go to conditional access here, I'm going to discard this. If I go to my insights and reporting in the conditional access blade, I can actually pull up the policy, which I didn't save, but I would be able to pull up the policy here and look and see what is the breakdown, how many people would have been blocked, how many people would have gotten through, etc. I can do this on a specific policy over here. So I could just say, oh, I don't know, pick any of them. Let's just say it was the risk policy, right?
Yep.
Pick this one, and then it shows me, right, how many users are impacted, how many would have gone through, how many would have literally been blocked. User action required would be MFA, how many would have gotten challenged with MFA, and how many were just out of scope of the policy, right? And this might also be important because maybe you're trying to target a particular group of users, but maybe you didn't scope it correctly. So this gives you all of that information here. So you'll have that level of confidence and assurance if you need to get sign off, or if you just have to make a decision on whether or not this policy is good to go. Let's hop back over to the deck, unless you had another comment, Mark.
No, this is great. So I think to answer your question, Andrew, I think he was asking specifically, like, he wants to kind of get more hands-on and stuff like this. So this is a good thing to turn on your test tenant and demo tenants. But Jeff or someone will share in the chat, there's a way to generate some of these risk signals yourself if you want to try to go build out some of these things. And we saw Jonas kind of suggest, like, he uses the Tor browser to generate some of those impossible travel and some of those types of risks as well. So so real good stuff there. But let's keep going. Let's keep going.
Yeah. Cool. So one thing you might be wondering is, like, what's the taxonomy? Like, what is this? What is risky user versus sign-in risk versus detection? I've talked about a lot of things. These are the building blocks for how we think about identity protection. And so risk detections at the bottom, those are the fundamental building blocks. Those are the bricks for how identity protection risk works. So individual detections could be, we detect Tor, and we call that anonymous browsing. We actually we group together Tor sessions and VPN.
It could be lots of things, but it's that risk signal. Yep.
That's one type of detection. Another type of detection is token theft. Lead credentials is another one. Password spray. We have it. I think we have a link we can send to you that'll give you all the different kinds of detections that we offer. Of course, we also have first party integrations with a lot of our Defender products. So if something is detected in MDE, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, they have one that's called attempt to access primary refresh token, right? So if we see that occur, we're going to ingest that and we're going to alert on that as well. And so we're giving you coverage not only within Entra, we're giving you a lot of coverage throughout the Microsoft suite. So that's the building block. Like I mentioned before, sometimes those detections are linked to a sign-in. And so we would flag that as a risky sign-in, and that's where you see that second tier. And I'm giving you some of the names of the collections off to the left here. So all these APIs here are ways that I didn't really mention APIs earlier, but if you have your own tooling that you want to be able to leverage our APIs, everything, and actually you can get even more functionality from our APIs in some ways than you can from what we offer in the portal. One of the key things that you can do in the APIs is you can really filter just how you want it. So if there's certain properties that you really care about, or if there's certain users who you really care about, you can monitor a lot more specifically because of the filter aspects of our APIs. But all of these things on the diagram here essentially roll up to one user. And so from a user risk perspective, the reason a person could be risky could be because of a risky sign-in, could be from something that wasn't related to a sign-in. But irrespective of that, we look at user risk. And you'll see throughout the Entra product that user risk can be used in a lot of other contexts. It's like, hey, the user's risky. Do we want to allow them to perform this X operation in Entra? Because if they're compromised, maybe we don't want that happening.
Yeah, it's really important. I would say a good takeaway for the audience here is make sure you're consuming these risk events either via Graph API calls, or there is a checkbox in the Event Hub if you're doing that Event Hub type of integration to your SIEM tool, and making sure that these are getting out there, because I've seen multiple times where customers think they actually don't have any risky users, which I find kind of hard to believe. And then we go look and they're pulling the sign-in logs and the audit logs. They didn't realize that they had to also go get the risky sign-in logs from another source, either via Graph API or in the Event Hub as well. So lots of good stuff there, but make sure you're consuming this, because there's lots of good signal in here. And if you're not, you're missing out, right? Pretty much, right? You're missing out.
Yeah. Like I mentioned before, we also offer protections for workload identities. And so we don't yet have sign-in risk for workload identities. We found that some workload, we see sometimes with service principals, the sign-ins are so frequent and so voluminous that trying to flag an individual sign-in would not be very helpful. But nevertheless, there are a lot of detections that we do have that would be good indicators of compromise. And so I encourage you to check those out and to see what we have to offer there. But similar taxonomy in the sense that you have an account risk at the risky workload identity level. We call it risky service principal in Graph, and then individual risk detections that support those.
Yeah, I mean, what's some of the things that cause like a risky workload identity? Like I had a couple. Well, I know one of where my customer, somebody accidentally checked in a secret into GitHub.
Yeah. So
and the dev team said they didn't, and
right.
I believe there's a link to the PR.
Yeah. So all of the service principal compromise that I'm seeing for the most part is around credential compromise, and usually it's secret. Usually it's a compromised secret, so an app password that's compromised, and it can often be because of problems in source control tools, like you mentioned. It could be that someone put the password on a Post-it or in a OneNote, right? There's all sorts of ways that
there's lots of ways to mess
leaked.
that up. Yeah.
Sometimes people inadvertently check something into a production environment instead of in a non-production environment, and something gets exposed, right? Something in the code itself gets exposed that wasn't supposed to. There's all sorts of problems. So basically the credential getting leaked. And so the detections, to answer your question directly, is we might detect the leaked credential if it's in a GitHub public repo. We did an integration with GitHub after the acquisition, so we can now consume that, and we certainly see instances of that coming in. But even if we don't detect it, we can also detect suspicious sign-in activity. So we will baseline up to 180 days of normal sign-in activity on a workload identity, and then if we see sufficient anomalies with current sign-in activity, saying like new user agent or frequency of the sign-in or location, changing, meaning like, the let's say the service principal typically is signing in from a particular data center, and all of a sudden we're seeing it, somewhere else in the world, right? Which we don't expect.
Very strong signal to go take.
Yeah, and because we also familiarize IPs and ASNs for the entire tenant, and so if an organization has, let's say, data center in Dublin and a data center in Amsterdam, it's like, but we usually only see this service principal signing in from Amsterdam. We will, and so for 6 months it only signs in from Amsterdam, but we already familiarized Dublin. If we see the service principal sign in from Dublin, we're not going to fire that as a risk, because we know that company uses Dublin as a data center, right? Mm-hmm. But if we see it now come from Virginia, where we've never seen the sign in come from, okay, now we might have a problem. Right. So we're looking kind of horizontally across the tenant to say, like, what's normal for not only for that individual account, but for the entire organization.
I think you're going to have to come back and do a deep dive in workload identities, because I think that's a whole other interesting, like, how do you deal with those? And some of those different signals are much different, but good stuff.
So we mentioned before about, the different reporting capabilities, how to get your risk data. So many ways to do it. It's with a lot of organizations, if they already have their tooling set up, they'll just use diagnostic settings and they'll export it to their tooling. But a lot of the cool stuff comes through what Defender can do with correlation. So they have incident correlation, where they can link up an alert and identity protection with alerts and other security tools all in one view. And I think that's pretty powerful. So definitely something to check out if you haven't already. This was an example of a risky sign-in. So you can see, like, okay, it's basically the way it would work in Graph is that you would get the entire sign-in, like, and then there's like a sub part of it that's populated by identity protection, and that's sort of highlighted here. So if you go to your audit logs, you'll see this. I want to get into I want to get into the meat of the talk.
So while you're getting a drink there, so I see Andrew's kind of asking a couple questions around KQL, and he's asking about Rod, Trent, and Matthew Zorich. So Andrew, sit tight. Those two and myself and Carissa, who's also on the YouTube stream, we're actually working on a KQL book. So it should be out later next year, and we're going to cover some of that type of stuff of, like, what to be looking for and some of the KQL queries that you should be running in your environment. So Matt actually just told me today his chapter on the threat part in the defense is 170 pages. He's got to kind of clean it up a little bit. So we'll have a lot of good content for you on that hopefully next year. And it's taking us a lot of time to build this book, so we are definitely going to promote this thing, like, all the time, because, like, we spend a bunch of time on this. We want people to get this into the community. So okay, let's talk about how these risk signals actually work.
Yeah. So, sorry, there's just a slight delay. So, okay, bringing you back to the view, right? Back to the big picture view, right? So we're going to be talking about the things on the left, and I wanted to break it down into these three categories. So we'll just take it category by category. So for auto-generated ones, the first thing to understand is, like, kind of how we approach using machine learning to calculate the risk on a particular sign-in. There's this joke about, like, Schrodinger's user. You guys know Schrodinger's cat. Like, the idea is, like, there's this black box, right? You can't see anything except the user.
Is it bad?
Is it alive? Is it dead? Exactly. Yeah, what's going on? We don't know, right? But they've presented a credential. So basically, what we do is we use the credential itself is the way that we're measuring the usage of the credential is how we're measuring risk. We build labels off of known attacks, incidents that Microsoft observes. We deploy those, we learn from those, and then we are able to assign particular risk using a classifier. So the way the classifier works is it says, like, it's essentially a series of if-then statements weighting different aspects of the sign-in attributes. And so I'll walk you through that. You can have no risk on a particular sign-in, meaning it's totally safe. Lower risk means that we have a lower level of confidence that the user was compromised. Medium is a moderate level of confidence, and high risk is the highest possible level of confidence. If we mark something as high risk, it's like we're almost certain that the account has been compromised, and you should treat it as such.
I think that's a common thing that customers kind of don't quite grasp the first time, is that the signal itself is not like, oh, we think this is a more important risk event. It's the confidence confident we are in the signal itself, right? That actual sign in or that user. That's why. So if you see a high risk user, like we are very confident that account is compromised or potentially compromised, right? So we should start with those types of things. So I think that's one of those things that people just don't quite get the first time when they start looking at some of this stuff.
Yeah, and I should also call out that like this is not this is something that we are constantly working on. Like we have an outstanding data science team that is constantly looking to push the envelope and move the needle on how high confidence we can be. Like our goal is to have high confidence on everything, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the world is a series of shades of gray, and like basically this tool is sort of like runs the gamut from being, having very high confidence detections, which like you should action right away, and then there's this sort of like gray area of like, well, we're like moderately confident, but we think it's safer to enforce with MFA, challenge with MFA, because it's better to be safe than sorry, right?
Right.
And so much of the like zero trust stuff, it's like it's less about like, is this like pre-breach versus post-breach philosophy of like, would you rather be 100% sure that you're breached and then respond to it, or would you rather, have a little bit of friction pre-breach, but then be able to very quickly respond and mitigate the risk? And our approach in Entra is we should do the latter. We should really focus on mitigating the risk at the front door, introduce a little bit of friction for the end user when we believe it's necessary, so to save yourself a world of pain, later on.
Yeah. That's good.
I'm just moving on. You'll have to. Sorry, it just takes a minute to advance the slide. That's why you see me like there. Okay, so here are some of the like ways we approach weighting sign-ins. So these are some of the things that this is just a representative diagram. Don't take this as like this is like illustrative, not like authoritative. So these are some of the attributes we might look at. Like, is it a normal time of day for the user to sign in? Like, is the user signing in on a device that we recognize? Is the app that they're trying to access familiar? Is their IP address that the user is originating from familiar to us? And the country that is associated with that IP address, is that familiar to us? So those are some of the things that we start to weight. And in milliseconds, we are coming up with a score that will decide: do we challenge this person?
Yep.
Do we mark them for risk? Right? Yep. What do we do? Right? Again, with the focus being on not disrupting productivity, right? Like that North Star, I guess, I don't know if this is necessary to say, but like we're not trying to make security, we're trying to make security almost invisible for end users, right?
Yeah. We only want to prompt them when we feel it's very necessary, right? To prompt them.
The old way was, if you're going to be on this, accessing this app, you're going to have to MFA every time, right? People don't like that. And A, they don't like it, and B, you get MFA fatigue, which means you're susceptible to MFA brute force, right?
We had a talk, I think last year, on some of that type of MFA fatigue and the passwordless stuff. And there was a customer that had a red team that was, they compromised a couple of users, and they got approval from their team, like their manager's like, hey, I'm just going to like go after these folks. Like, I'm just going to bombard them. Like, is that okay? And they said, yeah, go for it. Right. And so first of all, nobody reported that they were getting a lot of MFA prompts to the help desk, like at all. And one of the users, to stop it, just deleted the authenticator app from their phone. They're like, I just can't even. Yeah. I can't wait. So it's a real forcing people to MFA a lot all the time for real no reason is a real problem.
Yeah. And so this is sort of one of the nice byproducts of using risk, is basically saying, hey, only when necessary, right? And then that way, so everybody could, is a little bit happier with that sort of approach, on both on the security team side and on the end user side. So here's how our ML kind of fits into the taxonomy that I showed you before. So you have these real-time models. The real-time model is making a real-time assessment of risk on that individual sign-in, and that can affect sign-in risk. So there'd be a sign-in risk detection, like we mentioned. It could be Tor, could be token theft, could be just something called unfamiliar sign-in properties. So, okay, we don't recognize something. This person's coming from a new country, for example, right? Never seen that country before for this particular individual. And then that will affect the sign-in. And then if they don't mitigate it, then it's going to end up as a risky user as well. So we'll talk about how you mitigate. But I showed you in conditional access a few minutes ago, MFA alone can mitigate sign-in risk, but MFA plus the session control to force reauthentication will mitigate token theft. So very important that you just go ahead and do the latter and include that session control, because then you'll be accounting for both
Both.
token theft, and other categories of password attacks in one conditional access policy. Again, these things are not going to fire all the time, so it's not like people are going to have to be forced to sign in all over again.
It's super critical for that report only thing. We had a customer that was pretty large, like I think like 300,000 plus users, and they were really worried, like, are we just going to bombard the environment? And they had the report only mode on, I think for like 2 or 3 weeks, and they saw it was not too bad, like kind of a handful that would have gotten it. So that gave them the confidence to say, like, let's flip it on to enforced, and like we're in a much better state because of it. So that's a super key takeaway, I think. Yeah,
that's the way to do it. Yeah, and then so that's the real-time example, and then the offline example might be like so we have it. For example, we have a token theft offline token theft detection that runs logic after comparing tokens and pulling up some other telemetry. So it might take a few hours to come out, and then that type of model will run. That could affect sign-in risk offline, but it wouldn't challenge at that point. What would happen is it would affect the user risk, and so if you have a user risk policy, which I didn't show you yet, then that would prompt the user to do something like resetting their password next time they sign in. One key way to mitigate interruptions for end users is to specify what locations you trust. So you can do a number of things. We talked about named locations when I showed you the attack map in terms of places you want to block. And that's that you should do. You should do named locations for places you want to block. But within the category of named locations, you can also mark them as trusted. So you could say, hey, this is my corporate network. This is my IP range for my corporate network. And if you see traffic coming in from here, you can go ahead and trust it, right? And if you do that, if you mark locations as trusted, we will use that. And then if we see, it'll actually suppress risky sign-ins coming in from those areas. And so if you want us to just, if you basically want to reduce the instances of false positives and know, what you consider safe in your network, this is a way to do that.
Yeah, I think not enough customers do this. I think they feel like it is kind of a burden to kind of keep this updated. And we understand that is a little bit tough, but it really does help cut down on those false positives.
So I mentioned token theft a couple of times. I think it would be good, Mark, for us to just like spend a few minutes talking about this particular area. The reason being is it's growing as an area. It makes up only 3% of identity attacks that we observe, at least. But the volume has at least doubled in the last year. So
it's becoming more prevalent. Yeah, I mean, I know people sometimes get fixated on these like edge case things, and then there's a lot of other things we should make sure we're doing. But this is a growing concern that you should be thinking about in your environment for sure.
Yeah, and not to say it to like freak people out, but maybe just to say like we have mitigations for it. Like use them, right? Like just make sure that you're like deploying conditional access the way that we're outlining it, and like you're going to be able to disrupt a lot of those attacks, especially if you have things like Microsoft 365 Defender, which also detects adversary in the middle attacks. There's two flavors of token theft. I'm not going to be able to cover them all, to cover both. One is pass the cookie. We're not covering that. That has more to do with malware on the device. What we can address here in Entra ID is adversary in the middle attacks, where basically you have an attacker who sends a phishing email to a user. So I'm looking here at step number 1. The user then clicks on that malicious link, which takes them to the attacker's infrastructure. And the attacker has set up a reverse proxy with a legitimate website. And so in the course of authenticating to that legitimate website, they will, in this example, both authenticate and complete MFA. So they'll do their primary and multi-factor authentication. So now there's a claim on the token. And now here we're at step 4 and 5, where the credentials get sent back to the attacker. The attacker, because they're sitting in the middle of that infrastructure, are able to harvest not only the password, but also the token, which itself is a credential technically. And now that attacker can replay.
It's like evil jinx is kind of that infrastructure that kind of uses as a common.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a common.
That's a common one. Yeah, and now they're able to replay that. They pass the MFA check here at step 6 because again they have the claim the victim performed the MFA, and so now they're getting in, right, to the website. So I mentioned before how when I showed you conditional access, I said not just MFA but require reauthentication, right? And that this is one of the things that this is meant to disrupt is to say, if we detect that happening in real time, go ahead and make them do that, because the attacker is not going to be able to reauthenticate outside of their malicious infrastructure, right? So that's what you want to do. If you want more information about this, if you want this diagram, just go to this QR code, scan this QR code, and you can you can get
There's
it.
for sure not any malicious infrastructure in that QR code scanning, right? We would never do such a thing like that. I love that. We always talk about all these things like, don't click on any links. Here is this link that you cannot see, but we're telling you to click on, right?
Yeah. Sorry. You know, if you
Very
want, I'll send
trusting.
it out. I'll post it. If you want, I'll post it later. Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Trust us. It's be all right.
Yeah, exactly. So how do we detect token theft, right? So actually, a lot of the ways we detect token theft are the ways that we detect unfamiliar sign-in properties in general. We look at anomalous location. We look at the token lifetimes. So if we see a token that's unusually old, like could be very old, there is actually a black market for tokens, believe it or not. Tokens played out of order. So this might be where Mark signed in yesterday, end of the day, and now he has signed in again at 9 a.m. with a new. So he's been issued a new token today at 9 a.m. Excuse me, and then an hour later, Mark presents a token from yesterday. Azure AD is going to go, wait a minute, I already issued a new token to Mark. Why is he trying to use old token? Right. So we flag that's attacker activity. We can flag for that. Things that you might expect, seeing a new device or a different browser OS that we won't recognize. There might be missing required claims in the token. So sometimes what will happen is that the token will be used against a different resource. So let's say Mark was authenticated against Azure AD to go access Exchange, and then all of a sudden he has to go authenticated to Azure Resource Manager. So in that particular case, there might be a claim missing. And then looking at that combination of resources, hey, this identity device and token type is it anomalous, right? So those are some of the things we might look for. I'm just looking at the time, and I'm realizing that I probably need to speed up a little bit.
I was just gonna say we got about 15 minutes left, and also Erica had a question about illicit grant type of attacks. So we're not going to cover that here, Erica, but Jeff or someone else in the chat can share this with you. We did a lot of talks around that in 2020 and 2021 called Hiding in the Clouds, and then we also have some playbooks, some incident response playbooks, how to go look for that, as well as like some PowerShell scripts and things like that you can run to start dumping out those graph permissions in your environment. So we covered that in a whole bunch of other sessions. So we'll share that with you in the chat there for you, but we're not going to cover that here today.
Cool. Yeah, I'll speed it up. And by the way, thank you, Derek. Thanks for joining. Yeah, Derek has been one of our great partners in identity protection. So appreciate having you on the call.
Yeah.
So looking at malware, phishing, and remote access, these are some of the things we might look for on the endpoint for indicators of token theft. You can dive into this more offline if you want.
Yep.
And then things that happen after authentication, right? So if we see reconnaissance, if we see data collection, if we see indicators of persistence, such as the creation of new accounts, all those things are things that we would expect to see once a token is stolen. Okay, so that had to do with some of the ML stuff, how we weight different things and how we do things in real time. There's also some simpler detections that we have. So some of these are we call like rule based. So anonymous browsing is an example. We get a list of Tor exit nodes, refreshed daily. If we see a match, we fire a detection. Real simple. Right? Atypical travel is where we compare two different sign-in events. We look at the distance between those, and if the distance is such in literally in kilometers, past a certain threshold between the time frame that we see the sign-ins, we would flag it as atypical travel. Pretty straightforward. And leak credentials, I mentioned before, very much rule-based. If we have a valid secret, we validate that secret that's still active and usable. If it turns out that there's a match, we fire the detection, right? Pretty straightforward rule-based model. Not to say that they're easy to implement, because believe me, our teams have worked very hard, but they're very straightforward in terms of what they mean.
Understanding and what they mean, yeah.
This one, I feel like I kind of went through this before. We talked about some of it. I talked about how risk is generated. So at the risk of this being a bit of an eye chart, I'll just go through it quickly. Is that the idea is the user attempts to sign in, we detect that risk in step number 2, and then that can affect the user risk level, which could trigger an identity protection policy down in the lower left. In one scenario, if there's no sign-in risk policy, they just go right through, right? So we detected the risk, but nothing happened, right? This is where everything goes to the SOC team, right? This is where like all the work goes to the security team. Not ideal. What you want is the bottom one. The policy actually fires. The user has to do MFA, or they have to do secure password reset, right? Or maybe they're blocked. We don't really recommend blocking, but it's there for you. Now, all the security team does. Now the security team says, "Oh, they were remediated. Okay, great. if I ever need to get to that, I guess I'll look into it. But they're
Mhm.
fixed. Now the security team can go, have a cup of coffee. Like, great. Like,
What one of
so,
my customers does is when they use this to kind of filter out a lot of stuff, and then their team investigates the ones that fail, right? So instead of having
mhm,
this huge swath of risk events that they need to investigate all the time, it's really narrowed down to like a handful that their team can deeply dive into. And many times, actually, they'll call the end user and say, "Hey, are you're in over here in Cleveland, but I see you coming from Dallas." And like,
right.
"Oh yeah, I'm visiting my aunt." And they're like, "Okay, good, we're good to go." And I left my phone in my car or whatever, so I couldn't complete. Great, so we close that stuff out. But it gives them a
Right.
much smaller scope to go look at than it is
Yeah.
like a lot of
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah. We should do a session on like what's a safe way to reach out to an employee who's been compromised, because we've also seen
yeah,
issues where don't do it on Teams. Make sure you're talking to them live. I
there's a
guess.
lot of the end user comm stuff is very tricky for sure. For sure.
Okay. So that covers some of the auto-generated stuff. So expert-generated, I alluded to this before, but this is cases where we have our security our security research teams that are working every day to defend our customers. So one of the most prominent groups is Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, and we just went generally available with a detection that uses information from them. So they track threat actors, both nation state actors and cybercrime groups. And so this is when we see an IP address that Mystic has confirmed is being controlled by one of those actors, we will report it to you. And this thing fires thousands of times a day. So it's a high risk detection.
It's not good.
So if you see, it's
You
not
you
good.
see
If
this,
you
it's
see
not good.
this,
It's not a good day.
if you
Yeah,
see this, it means that user credential has been compromised. And
not
this
a
is
good
one of the
day.
other reasons why you want that conditional access policy, because again, it affects sign-in risk. So you can be remediating this like pretty quickly if you turn on the right policy. And then end user generated one. So a few ways that end users can generate. End users can generate. I mentioned there's two ways actually, and I don't know. We're a little short on time, but I can show you real quick if we Mark, if we skip back over to my
Sure.
my demo page here. So identity protection. So one thing you can do here, you can confirm compromise on a user. My screen is loading just a little bit slowly here. There's a button up here called confirm user compromise. So if I click it here, I can confirm them as compromised here, or if I am on the details, I confirm them as compromised here. So that's one way to do end user generated on the account risk, but you can also do it on risky sign-ins. So let me make sure I'm picking a lot of risky sign-ins here. And the reason for doing it on risky sign-ins is because you can mark individual sign-ins as compromised. And
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah,
I don't
you
think
can
I
do
knew
that.
that.
You can also mark them safe. And so so what you want to do is here. I think you have to do it in here we go. Confirm sign-in compromise, confirm sign-in safe. And so we look at this data, and we're actually in the process of using this data even more comprehensively in our product for you.
Yeah.
So so two ways that you can give feedback, both for your SOC team, for your own tracking, and again, like I said, Microsoft is going to be using that again. Mark, I think we can switch back, and I'll take us home. So let's get into some takeaways. So number one, I think I've said it about 10 times, but I'll say it again. The risk-based conditional access policy. I mean, this is the way to really take advantage of what identity protection can do, to make sure that end users can be productive but secure at the same time, to save the effort on your SOC team. Those are just some of the many benefits that you're going to get from this sort of thing. You also get very granular. You could have one policy for VIPs, one policy for guest users, one policy for the rest of the organization. And the second piece is the risk reporting piece. You can use the APIs that I call out here, but you can also stream your risk data to a separate tool, or use our portal, because we have a really nice landing page for you now, and we break it down. And it's really specifically designed to give you the analysis that you need, because these other things are just going to stream raw data, right? But the landing page that we've given you has really framed things in terms of hey, where's the threats, what are the action needed, right? Where's everything coming from? Hope that it's very valuable to you. But you can use the APIs, like I mentioned, to do a lot of write operations as well, if you need to.
I also like that we have the MITRE ATT&CK TTPs in there because sometimes you can like see if you have gaps in your coverage for those types of things as well. We got a question though, real quick, while you're closing this out from Neil. So it's about the confirm safe, confirm compromise type of stuff. So
Sure.
Neil's been on this, been with us for a while here, and he's got a really good case study on some of the stuff that they've done here. But let's pull this question out. So he's kind of confused, and the confirm compromise locks the user out, but confirm safe allows them to sign in. Can you maybe elaborate that a little bit more?
That's right. So when you confirm a user is compromised, I remember what I wanted to mention. You can confirm a user is compromised if they're already at risk in the portal. But if a user was not flagged by identity protection and you want them to be flagged for risk, you can do that in Graph. And that's one of the things that's useful in Graph is to say, like, hey, identity protection didn't catch something, but I need to raise this to my team, or I need to track this for some reason. Or I want them locked out.
Some other indicator of compromise has been brought to our attention, and we want
something somewhere else, a different tool, like found something, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, hey, I want to mark them as compromised. You can do that. So you're right. Confirming compromise, it locks the user out if you have a risk-based conditional access policy to block. Okay.
Yeah.
If you want to just disable the user, there is a button to do that. I didn't highlight it, but there is a button in identity protection. You can also do it in Graph, but there is a control. This is, by the way, this is more of a directory control. It's not even an ID protection thing. It's just
right
to mark them as enabled equals false, I think is the Graph thing. So basically disable the user if you want them. If you basically want to do like identity isolation, if you're like locked down, can't sign in, like you're frozen. So that's how you would do that. Confirm safe would allow them back in again. So what you're saying is you can use those confirm compromise and confirm safe if you have a conditional access policy where the grant control is to block access. Other than that, those things are not going to lock anybody out or allow anybody in.
Got it. Yeah. So we have about maybe 5 minutes left. Is there any other last demos you wanted to show, or are we kind of out of time for your elaborate demos?
I think we're good. I think we're good unless there's something that that people want to see. We can play around. I think we played around a little bit with the different tools. I'm happy to
Is there like a Graph API thing that you wanted to show, like in the Graph
Explorer? Yeah. We can do that. Yeah, let's do that. Let's switch over to that.
Let's bring that out. Thank you so much, Jorge.
Yeah. Thank you for the reminder.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Graph Explorer. It's a neat little tool if you don't, have another. You can use Postman or whatever.
Postman is a common one.
Yeah. So, but here's one that I like to use, and so we have a few like sample queries that you can run. So I'm already signed into. Make sure you're signed into the tenant that you want to be getting data from, right? Because the test data that they give you might not have anything that's useful. So if you just type in the word risk, there's 2 identity protection queries that you can get. So this one is where I can get all the high risk users.
So the queries there at the top, in the top bar. So if you want to copy that out, you could copy it out if you wanted to pull it, but that's the actual query itself.
Yes, exactly. And then when you look at the response, it's going to give you all these little like blobs, right? So here's like one risky user. This is Adele, and we don't have any details. We haven't done anything. We haven't dismissed risk or anything, so there's no detail yet. She's just at risk, and the risk level is high, and so the risk last updated. So it's to tell you like, okay, this is the last time that we had any sort of risk activity on Adele. It's a pretty small payload, right? Pretty simple, right? And we just list them out. Of course, this is again filtered, right? There's a filter here, so we didn't choose everything. Let's look at the risk detections. This one's going to give us a little bit more detail.
And this is what people can call from their seams and their filtering that you mentioned earlier, right? Like if you want to filter stuff out, this is some of the commands they would use to do that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So here's an example of a risk detection, and we have a lot more information here. So if we have the correlation ID and the request ID, these are the things that relate to the sign-in, right? That if you're going to want to go say, okay, well, oh my gosh, they found this thing, and like which sign-in was it related to, and what was the type? Okay, so by the way, all this is in our docs, the link that Mark shared, the AK link. But this means that we saw unfamiliar sign-in features. This shows that an admin dismissed the risk. The risk level was low. Here, actually, it's that the AI confirmed that the sign-in was. So this means that the user actually did something to remediate their risk. It probably means that they completed MFA, so they self-remediated.
Awesome.
And then this was detected in real time with a sign-in, right? And so, and it's just a ton of details here around like when we saw the activity, what was the IP address. So this is a type of detail that we think security teams find super useful because it's giving you just a lot of information. And we have this JSON and additional info that we use to provide even more details for you. Sometimes we'll like have a risk reason. So like if there's like something very specific. Oh, so here we have like our MITRE technique here, which is called out. So that's a new addition. So kudos to our folks who work on that. I know Carissa worked on that quite a bit.
She did. She was a big proponent of it.
Yeah. So a lot of detail here that you can get, a lot of detail that you can choose to filter or action on. I had one customer who, with workload identities, they were interested in automatically rotating a password when there was leaked credentials. So they set it up so that they would stream all the risk data into a logic app, and then they would have a trigger to say, if the risk event type was leaked credential, then run this logic to go rotate a password. You could do it for any business process that you want to do. It doesn't have to necessarily be a credential rotation. It could be just sending a notification to the right team or getting it into the right tool that you need. Any questions or comments, Mark?
Neil had a question about the adversary in the middle stuff, but I think the chat got it, so he's good there. So I think this is so we got like probably a minute left. So is there like what are the go-dos? What do you want everybody to like? They watch this. Like, what do you want? What you can?
Yeah. No, the go-do is if you're not doing risk-based conditional access today, turn on a report-only mode policy and start to just see what happens. Because you're gonna get you could say like, oh, I want to fully get everything into my SIEM tool, or I want to observe, what the risk data is looking like. You're going to see it in the report only mode policy, because you're going to see like who's getting flagged for high risk, who would have been prompted to reset a password or complete MFA. You can see all that data they provided there for you. Yeah. It's really one of the most critical things you can do to increase your security posture. So I would just try that out. But if you run into trouble, like hit us up. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. Mark's got his, many social media accounts, and Jorge and all of Bailey and all the folks, hit us up if you're running into problems, because we're here. That's what we're here to help you with.
Yeah, feel free to put in the chat or hit us on the 425 page on LinkedIn. So with that, we'll kind of wrap this show up. So again, just a reminder, follow us on the LinkedIn page here. If you have any questions or you're doing some deployments of this, you need a little more help, post them there. We'll do our best to kind of get you there and help. Just a reminder, so we try to do a live show every week. So next week is actually going to be focused on Entra permissions management. And we're going to have Bailey. So she's coming off her SANS Cloud Security Summit presentation where we talked about this in Dallas of this week. So she's going to talk about that with Nick, kind of talk about Entra permissions management. There's a lot of things to go fix in that in terms of over permissions of users, apps, groups, things of that nature. And then the week after that, Jeff's going to be back for another governance session, kind of digging deep in some of the ways we can extend some of the different governance aspects that like logic apps and stuff like that. So that will be a very deep show on that one. And then the week after that, I think we're up for another what's new in Microsoft Entra ID with Grace and Jorge. So check us out. We'll keep posting these as we go. So I think that's pretty much up for the show. So thanks a lot, Eitan. Thanks for joining. Go ahead. Last thing.
Oh, last thought. Make sure you come to Ignite or show up for Ignite, because we're going to have a lot of good stuff. I didn't talk about what's next. Lots more coming in the next few months.
I think you're going to have to come back for another show here, right?
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that. But stay up on Ignite, stay up on our product page, which we provide the AK link for. So thanks, everybody.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody.